Good evening, everybody. This is the North Andover Board of Health meeting for Thursday, June 28th, 2018. And I call the meeting to order. First thing we're going to do is to pledge of the allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we're going to take the meeting in order on the agenda, and there are no public hearings this evening, so we're going to bypass that. We'll go to the approval of minutes. Has everybody read the minutes? Okay. Joe?
Make a
you're
motion
okay with
to
them?
approve the minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Okay, that's done. Now we're going to go under communications, announcements, and discussion. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the town's social media policy for promoting what the various professional speaker series that we do at the library or here at the Board of Health meetings, or any other advertising that we want to do as a department. So Brian, I'm going to turn that part over to you to comment.
Just a memo in your packets from the town manager's office regarding social media policy. What they want to do is basically try to make sure everybody's on the same page, make sure you're using town accounts. When you're speaking for yourself personally, don't speak for the boards, the commissions without public hearings or discussions with a quorum, things like that. So take a look at the policy. Just if we're going to do any advertising for ourselves for our meetings, we will go through the IT department and follow the standard protocols and policies basically set up.
Okay. This came up somewhat during when I gave testimony during the meeting of the selectmen on the update for the Board of Health. And that's why I think this came out, to make sure that everybody's following town policy for the social media policy.
All the commissions, all the departments.
Yeah, everybody. And
Yeah.
we are in compliance, correct?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, good. So we're doing it right.
Yes, but with social media being new, they don't want each department opening up their own Facebook page.
Okay.
Or having their own Twitter feeds, things like that. They just want to make sure it's all done through a centralized system versus all over town, bits and pieces, misinformation, or not getting out the same information as other departments, things like that. So this keeps it cleaner and a little bit more efficient.
So it doesn't go on Brian's Facebook account?
No.
Okay, good.
Frank's maybe.
Frank's. All right, that's fine. And now, with really great honor, Dr. Tom Trowbridge is going to lead a discussion and give a talk on oral cancer presentation. And Dr. Trowbridge, maybe you could just tell us a little about your self educationally and what you're currently doing.
Well, I'm an oral surgeon. I practice in Lowell, where we have 3 practices, one office in Lowell, Chelmsford, and Nashua as a group, a corporate practice, not a good term. As a corporation, we practice full scope of oral surgery, including some cancer surgery, which is sort of the focus of tonight. So I was trying to find the video that I had that was kind of neat, but I've not able to find it. Have something that's real small that maybe we could see at the end. But really the interest of, one of the big interests of dentistry in terms of public health matter is that of oral cancer. And I'm not going to give a comprehensive talk about oral cancer tonight. We don't have time for that, and I don't think they want to sit for all that either. But for the past few years, one of the big concerns that's been coming up is we're seeing more younger patients are developing or are being found to have oral cancer, and the research is showing that that's because of some degree of exposure to human papillomavirus or HPV. And there are a couple of the strains of that are that seem to be part of the, when they study the cancer itself, that those are the strains of HPV that are linked to the oral cancers. and that's also the HPV strains that are causative factors in cervical cancer and various genital cancers. So it's a real concern in our younger population, somewhat due to changes in sexual activity and how they get exposed to each other. But we're now finding that the incidence of oral cancer in older patients is about the same as it's been for a long time, or maybe dropped just a little bit, because the smoking rate is going down and people are perhaps a little bit more prone to go to dentists and find these things. But the incidence of oral cancers that are related to HPV in young patients are going up. So I have just a very short thing about oral cancer itself. But I, again, didn't want to give a comprehensive lecture about cancer, and believe me, I didn't bring any pictures, or I'm not going to talk about orals, that kind of surgery, but just talk a little bit about types of cancers and things that we see in the mouth. So the oral cancer, so when we talk about the oral cavity and cancers in the mouth or the oral cavity, there really are actually two separate anatomic areas, and I say that partly because it pertains to tonight. There's the oral cavity and the oral pharyngeal cavity, or area, which separates at about the back of the palate. So when you think of the oral cavity, that's the area that includes the visible part of the tongue, the floor of the mouth, the gum tissue, the cheek, the lips. That's the oral cavity. And then those are the areas that are really quite visible to all of us and are really readily seen for self-examination. But the oral pharyngeal area is the base of the tongue, the tonsillar pillars, the back of the throat, the soft palate, a little bit of the lower part of the nose, and the upper part of the larynx, or what's called the hypopharyngeal area. And those are the areas that are more difficult to visualize and are more at risk. One thing that we've seen for many years in oral cancer is that when you talk about cancers, a lot of times we talk about a 5-year survival rate, and that's somewhat of a definition of how well medical environment is handling types of cancers across the social strata. So the 5-year survival rate for patients with what we call localized cancer, or very focal cancer that hasn't spread anywhere, is 83%. But in any of these cancers, again, oral cancer or oropharyngeal cancer, when those cancers spread to some other part of the body, whether it's lymph nodes or some other distant part of the body, that 5-year survival rate drops to 36%. So that's why every year the Oral Surgery Association, the ADA, have tried to make April the Oral Cancer Awareness Month. So that was when I was supposed to talk, and I missed that month. But there are some risk factors. For many years, they've included tobacco use and high alcohol consumption. And when you put heavy use of those two things together, it increases your risk quite a bit. If you've been in various social circles where we see people from parts of Asia, I happen to practice in Lowell, and we see patients there who come from India and Southeast Asia, and they have a habit of chewing what's called betel nut or betel quid, and that's a very highly carcinogenic material. And just last year, somebody brought it in, and I saw it for the first time. It's a pretty nasty bit of stuff to look at it for the first time, but this is something that's used to a very high degree in those areas of the world. And in fact, in India, I understand they have hospitals that are dedicated to oral cancer patients. It's such a highly carcinogenic product. But again, of late, we're starting to see that there's a small uptick in patients who have exposure to human papillomavirus, and that genetic component being found in their cancer lesion. So there is a protocol that's put out by the National Institute for Dental and Craniofacial Research. That's an oral cancer exam that goes to dentists, and that's a very thorough exam. But there's also a self-exam that we like to put out also. And I know if I can plug into that, Brian, I can kind of put it up on the screen. But it's just a basic look around. What you're looking for is either white or red lesions that haven't been there, bumps that were not there in the past, swelling. It's always a good idea to feel into when you're doing a self-exam. If you get swelling or bumps or lumps in the neck, that's already a sign potentially of an advanced metastatic spread into a lymph node and is a pretty ominous sign. So I can show that maybe at the end. But how much does this affect the country? So when you think about the number of cases in the country, it's been pretty stable for a long time. So the total number of new cases in 2018 is estimated to be a little bit over 51,000, and the number of oral cancer-related deaths is on the order of 10,000. That's a pretty significant number. Oral cancer accounts for about 3% of all cancers that are discovered, and 1.5% of all cancer deaths. So the relative risk compared to all cancer is good, but again, looking at that that change from a local problem to a more distant problem is a big difference. So that's why it's very beneficial to find these things early on. I mentioned before that there are a couple of these anatomic areas, and sort of again the problem in terms of this is that human papilloma, the HPV virus, the risk factor, there's a difference in the risks of those two anatomic areas. They have a different lymph node drainage, different exposure to things in oral cavity, and so the HPV is the risk factors to oral pharyngeal cancer, which is a little harder area to visualize either by yourself or even by a dentist or a physician who's used to doing this a lot. So but we're also seeing patients, younger patients with cancers that are on the tongue that are very visible areas who get discovered and biopsied, and I've heard of patients at 15 and 18 years old. There's now some study going on along those lines. So to focus on HPV, because I said that would be part of mostly of what I wanted to look at tonight, it's been estimated from the U.S. Cancer Registries that about 63% of oral pharyngeal cancers that are discovered in a year are associated with HPV infection. And the two types are HPV 16 and HPV 18. Frank, you might have sort of heard that in your circles. Those are the ones that are the types that are associated with cervical cancer and genital cancer. So let's go back to perhaps signs and symptoms, and I'll talk a little bit about what we can do about this. So what are the self-found lesions or dentist-found lesions that are most common that we look for? Again, they're what are called white patches or red patches. The medical term is leukoplakia and erythroplakia. And I put those words out, and I say those to patients once in a while, but I also caution most patients, don't go home and Google these words, because when you do, the way that Google works is not by medical risking, it's by who clicks on things more. So the weird, gory, scary stuff tends to get clicked on a lot more. So any medical term that you search in Google, I think you get the really weird, scary, bizarre stuff come up first, and then people come in a week later and say, oh my God, Google says I have this. Well, oftentimes you have to sort of do a calming conversation at that point. But anytime that a dentist sees, again, a white or red patch that's not been there before, we ask them to at least flag that on their examination and consider a referral to consider a biopsy. So me being the surgeon, I will often get referred this patient, and we have to look back at the risk factors and make a decision about whether to do a biopsy or not. And so white patches and red patches have some risk, but if you see a lesion or an area in the mouth that has red and white mixed together, that's an even greater risk. So we have to kind of put this all again into a little bit of a stratum, because most patients don't like to have surgeries, even a small biopsy. So we have to kind of put it into a certain amount of risk decision and say, was this something we should do a biopsy soon? Is this not really very likely to be a lesion? Can we leave this alone? Or should we have you come back in a few weeks and recheck it and make a decision at that point? What are the common complaints that patients might say? Again, if there's a lump or swelling that hasn't been there before, a soreness or something they swallow, they feel something in the throat that they didn't have before, some difficulty with chewing or swallowing, difficulty moving the mouth or the tongue, or hoarseness. These are things that are signs of pretty advanced disease that, unfortunately, we see more often than we wish. Given the types of patients who get these, again, remembering that the patients that are at greatest risk for getting oral cancer in the traditional mode are patients who have a high alcohol and smoking usage. Those are not patients who seek medical care quite a bit. In fact, a lot of those patients find themselves in a situation where they don't want to go to medical care because when things happen to them, they have a certain amount of avoidance, and they'd rather not find out what it is. So they will tend to, patients that fall in this field, in this diagnosis, oftentimes we'll ask them, and they'll say, oh, this has been there for 2 years, or I noticed it's small a couple years ago and I didn't do anything about it because I was afraid, or it didn't bother me much, and then they come in with a large fungating thing. The bad part about oral cancer is it does not tend to cause pain. In fact, it has to be a pretty advanced disease before they'll have any pain, because it's a slow, infiltrating, destructive disease. So you have to have in the oral cavity, you have to have a faster moving thing to press against the nerve to cause pain, rather than something that's slowly erosive and destructive. The nerve just gets destroyed rather than pushed on and have pain from that. So it's funny, very few patients come in and say, well, I had any pain from it. So again, just one of the highlights going all the way through dental school and more now, given the problems with HPV. We always talk with dentists about getting a full history so we can assess any risk factors, performing a full intraoral and extraoral exam, both a visual exam and a tactile exam. If there is a suspicious lesion, and the definition of that does sometimes vary or change either from time to time or from patient to patient, the most prudent thing is to perform a biopsy and get a real diagnosis. There are some screening devices that have been around for a while that became popular maybe about 10 years ago because it was felt that it was something. There were some salivary devices that would assess what was picked up in the saliva by a brush cytology, or using an ultraviolet light under a certain screen with a certain type of an eyeglass on, that if an area showed up as having a different color when the light was shown on it, that was a risk factor. Well, that was popular because it seemed really easy and nice to do, and it didn't involve any needles or blades. But it's shown to be really not very predictive in terms of finding lesions. So that's sort of gone out of favor. So then, again, I said I would skip the surgery part of it, so I won't talk about that. But then, again, thinking about HPV, we think, well, what can we do about that? I know a few years ago, the HPV vaccine really came into the news. It came into public health, very much promoted. And we can think, well, would getting patients vaccinated early on, would it help with this? The data, the answer is not really completely out on that right now. It's possible that HPV vaccination may help to prevent these cancers, but there's not any real good research that shows that at this point. The problem in medicine and understanding why things happen is that some things happen as a primary cause, where if you have X, you have a higher risk of having Y, but some things have a secondary association where having X may be associated with A, which can then lead to Y. And so, again, a lot of dental associations and federal research groups are looking at, well, if we can vaccinate for HPV, will that decrease the rate of these HPV cancers down the road? It's you think of it sort of linkage-wise, it's a simple study, but in order to get a good answer, you need a huge power, a lot of numbers and patients enrolled in something like this. And when you think of something that affects less than 1% of the population to get to those numbers, and the HPV component of it is even smaller than that. It takes a lot of enrolled patients to really get to a good power of that answer. So yes, as a public health person, I would continue to promote the HPV vaccine, but I cannot really tell you that getting the HPV vaccine, based on what we know now, is going to prevent the patient from then having a risk for an earlier onset oral cancer. So that means that continued dental exams and close vigilance remains to be important as we sort some of these things out. I think I'll kind of leave it at that.
Thank you.
Questions?
No, that was great.
No, it's, we just go right onto a screen.
Plug it right into that.
Well, I have like an,
Right now, we're having technical difficulties, so stay tuned.
Tell me your email again.
North Andover. Go. Okay, here's the one that's oral cancer, so.
We're going to get some more technical help. I found it very interesting. I don't hear much about oral cancer in general. I don't.
It kind of gets wrapped into a larger group called head and neck cancers.
Yeah.
But they're actually very important because they're very destructive. And they're disfiguring, and they affect your ability to eat.
I mean, as a pharmacist, I've seen people come in who've had oral cancer surgery.
Yeah.
And it's depending upon how invasive and so forth, you know, they're not feeling well.
If it's on the tongue,
Yeah.
you cut out part of it, it affects your
Right,
speech, your ability
right.
to swallow. There's the nerve damage that can occur, can affect other things.
You know, besides
They
it,
aspirate,
yeah,
you die from that.
yeah. You know, if you went to an ENT, ear, nose, and throat surgeon, also, they'd probably be able to, they would be able to spot something like that, and then,
Yeah, but I think that the dentist is really on the front line because they're actually looking in there all the time. The ENT, you don't go see an ENT unless you have an ENT
no,
problem.
unless you're there.
But the dentist is looking in there, hopefully every 6 months.
Yeah,
I noticed that one thing that my dentist does now that was never done before is at the end of the exam, in addition to palpating the lymph nodes, they take a piece of gauze and grab your tongue, pull it out, and move it around up and down.
really?
Experts come to the next meeting. But I don't know what this has to be something around this message. But you are going to mention how many towns signed on.
Yeah, oh,
That's
that.
That's constituents, that's voters, that's, like, I like Governor Baker, like his overall auditory students and all that. But, you know, like the rating of house efficiencies, I like that idea. Some people don't, realtors don't. But this natural gas pipeline is something that's pushing. It's just, it's not good. We don't need more gas, we need more conservation, more solar, more wind. The problem is nuclear is going off. Seabrook is going off. And it was down for like 3 weeks. Once we ran without it for 3 weeks. But that combined with no more natural gas, this is why the governor, he wants to make sure that we don't end up bringing Russian ships. Again, we brought Russian ships in 2 years in a row. People don't even know that the federal government wouldn't allow that. I think Russian ships to come and bring natural gas. I don't think that's allowed.
HPV has a predilection to infect squamous cells. And so you see the squamous lining. And I usually tell patients, just like the inside of your cheek is the same as your skin, except it doesn't have keratin in it.
Yeah.
And so it's
Well, these are this is the description of a self-exam. Again, these are things that any person can do at home, just like they talk about self-breast exam or other types of exams. These are pretty simple things people can do at home, and I do get patients come in and find things like this. And again, I sort of go down a question series of, is this new, is it changed? You know, we have to go through various different things. But you can do it monthly. I don't know if it's really that important to do it monthly. I think at the public health level, it's probably good to suggest a certain interval, but probably monthly is overly rigorous. But if you wear a denture, obviously you have to take the denture out. We see patients once in a while who've worn dentures for a long time. They don't take them out very often. You take the denture out, and there's a big thing underneath there that's going to lead to some big surgery. So you want to take the dentures out. Look and feel inside the lips and the front of the gum tissue area around the lower front teeth, and look and see, are there any, again, as I said, white or red lumps or bumps. You can tilt your head back, and I have patients who tell me they do this all the time at home. They'll turn their head backward and look in the mirror and shine flashlights and put mirrors up and things, and look to see up in the roof of the mouth, what we call the palate. It's very easy to pull the cheek out and see the inside surface of the cheek as well as the back of the gums. That's good, but the cheek actually isn't an area that we see very many cancers, but it's part of the full exam. But pulling out the tongue, and you just mentioned pulling out the tongue is a very high-risk area for oral cancers because it has a lot of lymph node drainage, but the exposed areas, the smoking and alcohol, there's some component of just the exposure to it and genetic changes, but also just having that product sit in certain areas of the mouth. So patients may take a drink and they'll kind of let it sit in their mouth. It's going to sit against the tongue much more than it sits against the palate. So there's an exposure issue in terms of the tongue having an area that can be a problem. And then again, I talked a little bit about the lymph nodes or the glands and what you feel down here. And the lymph nodes or the glands will get enlarged from lots of different things. So again, we'll see patients come in once in a while who either come directly to us or come in from their dentist saying, my lymph nodes are enlarged, do I have cancer? And we don't go right to that as the primary point because the lymph node is a spreading type of an area. You have to look in the oral cavity and, like Frank said, sometimes even the esophagus to look for, or our ENT colleagues actually see more laryngeal cancer than they probably wish they would either. So we have to do a full exam of those areas. Then, as I said before, we're looking for white patches, leukoplakia, red patches, erythroplakia. So up here, this is a white patch. That's a very defined, nicely circumscribed white area. That's actually a little bit lesser risk than a white patch that is fuzzy and you can't define it very well. Things that are well circumscribed, and we say sometimes if you can draw a pencil around it, that's less risk than if you have a hard time finding the border or the margin. So this one here, this is sort of a reddish area that is spread out more, and you can't really see the edges of it very well. That's a risk area. I think they're actually calling this one is a mixed lesion. So here it's a little bit more reddish, but down here it's a little bit mixed red and white. So that's the area that we look at as being the area that we would want to consider biopsying. This patient here, they're showing a little lump on the gum tissue that's just above the teeth. That's a risk area. And then here, I think this is the palate, so that's a big white area up there. that's also a potential problem. Now, this patient here is showing a lump in the neck. This is going to tell us we have to look for a primary source. We're not going to say, gee, Mr. Jones, I'm going to biopsy this area, because then we'd be only finding the spread disease. We want to look inside his oral cavity, throat, voice box area, and look for a primary lesion. We do know that the lymph nodes get drained from certain areas of the mouth, so there are patterns where if it's in the sort of the under the jaw area, that spreads from the side of the tongue and back areas. If it's more under the chin area, that tends to come from the lips and the sort of the front of the mouth area. But this is a very simple self-exam that can be done, and then if a patient finds any of these things, then down here they talk again about the more problematic things at a higher grade of problem, that if you have these things, you're in a more likely to have a metastatic disease. Things like a chronic sore throat, difficulty with chewing or swallowing, or mass or lump in the neck. Those are signs that are telling us we need to look for an entity in the what we call the primary point, which again is the mouth or the oropharyngeal area. And it's surprising, everybody that has a disease like this does not have a huge disease in their mouth. You can have a very small cancer in the mouth and get a very nasty spread to a lymph node or even a distant area like this. So small and big don't make a lot of difference. The disease is a disease, and it's graded by its aggressiveness, but really what we're looking for is suspicious areas like those things there. And then I don't ever tell a patient, I can visually tell you this by looking at it with my eyeballs. We need to really think about if this is a potential risk point, we need to do a biopsy and get a histologic exam of what these tissues are. So that's a quick thing of a self-exam. I have one page of this, I can pass this around if you want to look at that one also. So.
A question for you. The leukoplakia and the erythroplakia, the red and white patches, those are potentially precancerous but not malignant lesions.
Correct, not in and of themselves, yes.
Now, do they follow like the way cervical cancer does, like a dysplasia cancer sequence?
Right.
And so do you ever see, like, once you get dysplasia, if you will, does it ever regress on its own? Or do you have to just remove it and just say, we prevented a cancer?
Right, no, if you do a biopsy of one of these lesions, and you find dysplasia, you want to remove it. Yes, in the oral cavity, because it's a squamous cancer, like you said, mucosal disease, once it's started its progression, it's a forward-moving thing. The time frame we can't predict. There may be patients who say they've had this little white spot for a long time, and we'll do a biopsy, it'll be a mild dysplasia, but at that point we have to say they're in line to get a cancer. We can't really ever say, well, don't worry about it, this will be fine because it's been there for, a couple years.
So you wouldn't
they've gotten
survey
in the
it?
queue, yeah.
You wouldn't survey, you would just take it out at that point?
Yes.
Tom, what % of the biopsies come back positive or negative?
Well, that's really hard to say because I don't biopsy all of these in the world.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that of leukoplakia, just take those white patches I showed you, the risk of a leukoplakia, of a true leukoplakia, being something in the strata like Frank referenced, being either a precancer or cancer is on the order of 10%.
Okay.
And there are a lot of things that we biopsy that don't truly fall in that. But if you really look at real leukoplakia by a clinical definition description, it's a 10% risk.
Okay.
Now, HPV is also the virus that can cause common warts on your hands or fingers or things like that. And we don't consider those necessarily pre-malignant lesions. Is there a corollary in the oral cavity that is a HPV lesion that is not pre-malignant?
It's a good question. I can't answer it. There are, in the oral cavity, there are small benign lesions called a papilloma, which are the oral equivalent of a wart, more or less. We don't routinely test those for the HPV types, and we don't have all those patients come back and screen them or check them all the time for cancer. When it's been done in a research environment, when you remove a papilloma from the oral cavity somewhere, and they look for the virus is gone. The virus has set up a mucosal change, and you get a bump or something, and you can detect its prior presence, but there's no more active virus there. So I think that's a sort of a question that's out to jury still.
You mentioned as far as being aggressive, well, not necessarily aggressive, but the survival after 5 years and so forth. Is this more aggressive than if you had a cancer elsewhere in the body? Is the oral cancer more, in its nature, more aggressive once it begins?
That's a difficult question to answer because there are a lot of factors involved, including causative factors, including where you find it in its stage.
Okay.
I mean, we generally expect to be able to tell a patient that if we remove a small cancer in the tongue and it's removed completely and there's no spread, that we expect them to be cured. We basically, even a patient like that, though, you put them on a 5-year observation, close protocol. But if you find the patient in more advanced stages, then it can be every bit of as aggressive as pancreatic cancer or some other entity. It can be a very difficult, disfiguring treatment, but it can also be a real killer, and there's so there's no easy answer to that.
Yeah.
They come in various grades. Some patients, when you find this cancer and you treat them, they will stop smoking. Some will not. There's a role to be played there also. So I can't answer that question really.
Okay. Now, I was telling Frank that my grandfather chewed chewing tobacco all his life. He didn't develop any cancers, oral cancers or anything, but, you know, when I was growing up, he was all day long chewing tobacco. And
That's a whole different story.
a whole different story, you know.
Yeah. Chewing tobacco has a sort of a whole different risk factor and
Right.
things involved there, and it's but as any other risk factor, everybody that does something for whether it's a short period of time or 50 years doesn't automatically get the problem that can occur from that. There are other factors that play into it, and we can do that across the board of other things also. So the fact that your father did chewing tobacco for many years doesn't mean that you should do it for many years because he was fine. It's
Right, definitely, definitely. Do members of the audience have any questions they'd like to bring up to Dr. Trowbridge on oral cancer? Or share something? It's okay. Okay.
It can be, again, my big point is that early observation and both self-exam and dental exam are really important because once you get a little bit past the small disease, it's pretty miserable for the patient. In fact, I'm seeing a patient a couple weeks. We have to take out, I promise not to do any surgery descriptive, but an example was that a patient whose dentist had removed some teeth a year ago, and she developed a sore on the gum, and they watched it for a year and then sent her to me, and I did the biopsy because I had immediate concern it was a cancer, and she was sent to BU and had half of her upper jaw removed, and now I need to remove a bunch of her teeth for her to get radiation for 6 weeks, and hopefully she will survive. It becomes a big, big life problem.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Question for you. We talked about HPV being the causative, being the cause of a lot of these oral cancers. Is it now routine to do HPV testing on tissue biopsies?
Generally, no.
So it's not routine, so you have to ask for that.
Right.
So if you send a specimen, you say, you know, tongue lesion, assessed for dysplasia, assessed for HPV.
I think probably my guesstimate would be that if you sent biopsies to an academic center, like I sent a lot of my biopsies to Tufts, they will do that. But if you send it to a community hospital, pathology service, they probably do not. I mean, you could request it if you felt the patient was in a risk level, but I think it's not the accepted standard, but I think probably at academic centers, given things like this, they're probably starting to do that more.
And does knowing the HPV status change how you manage it?
No.
And Tom, there's an increase of it. Is it because of increased promiscuity, or is that one of the factors?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Any more questions for Dr. Trowbridge?
Great presentation, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Not a cheery topic you wanted tonight, but, matter of public health, I think.
Well, in general, I go to my dentist every 6 months for a checkup. I guess that's the recommended? Every 6 months. Okay, I do. Good, thank you very, very much. It was excellent. I learned a lot. Okay, so now we're going to go, we had a citizen's petition, and Minister Blumel, is Minister Blumel here? Okay, so, that's okay. That's okay. So I'll just give a little background. So I received an email, and the minister of North Parish Church wanted to give her opinion, or whomever would like to, on our agenda regarding natural gas pipelines going through Massachusetts and its effects, and also to give her opinion on a letter that was sent out by the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards requesting that various boards of health join them in sending a letter to Governor Baker. Is that correct? Okay. And I read, and a lot of the information, whatever the minister sent, Brian had sent information that came to me. I sent to Brian, and he would have sent it out. So I read what the minister sent out, and would you like to? It'll be a limited discussion, time-wise. So when I say thank you, and the discussion's over, well, I'm not going to go like this. But please feel free, any of you, to come up and present your opinion, like the minister asked to do. Thank you. Please state your name and address, and your, I guess, relationship.
Okay, yeah. All right, my name is Lynn Langton, and I live on 10 Surrey Drive in North Andover. And I go to the North Parish Church where Reverend Blumel is a pastor. And she does a lot of educational things, and one of the things that was brought to our attention was a lecture on the effects of natural gas. And we had a doctor come in and give us some really interesting facts about it. On the packet that was given to you, I mean, it does list some things right here: toxic contaminants in natural gas, carcinogens like benzene and formaldehyde, heavy metals like lead and mercury, and heavy metals can cause a lot of neurological effects and birth defects, radioactive elements like radon and radioactive lead, damage caused by fires and explosion, contribution to air pollution, lung disease from burning natural gas and from gas releases. Also, things that natural gas, there's many, many leaks in the pipelines, and the leaks, besides having all these toxic things, have particulate matter, which becomes lodged in the lungs and causes a lot of asthma and asthma-like conditions. I guess in April of 2017, a letter was sent to the Mass Association of Health Boards, and the letter was stating that they were trying to get together the boards of health in the communities to sign a letter going to Governor Baker to help stop, I guess, new pipelines being run through the state of Massachusetts. I'm here because I am a concerned citizen of this town and of Massachusetts, and I am concerned about these pipelines. I had no idea that these pipelines leak, and one of the papers that we have shows North Andover, and all of those dots were leaks in the pipelines, and the red ones have been fixed, but the yellow ones are still leaking.
Looks like
Natural.
it's congested into the old
Yes,
center of town.
yes,
Main
it
Street,
is.
yeah.
So, yeah, that was quite interesting. And another effect of natural gas leaks is methane. And methane is a big contributor to global warming because it's 34 times more like heat generating than carbon dioxide. So not only would stopping natural gas pipelines help with the health in our town and nearby people, but it would also help with the global warming issue. So I'm not an expert in all of this, like I said, but I do feel compelled as a citizen to bring this to your attention and to join with, there's another paper here of all the other towns in the state of Massachusetts that have signed the letter going to Governor Baker, and I'm just urging you all as a board representing us as citizens to join them in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And in her email to me also mentioned that there were some leaks that haven't been fixed, and I spoke to Brian about that, just to inform, Brian, you'll just make mention to wherever it goes to
Yes.
let them know
Stanford.
about what
Yeah.
the minister had said as far as that
Exactly.
goes. So we will follow up on that. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? Certainly, please state your name and address.
Say a couple words. James Worden, 84 Academy Road. I'm not in any industry right now, so no, whatever you call it, conflicts of interest. I have been in the solar electric business and in the electric car business before that, so I appreciate and love green. We have to get off of fossil fuels, and we all know that, but not much is going on too fast. But Governor Baker wants a stable energy source. It's clear why he wants more gas. In the winter, we get problems when there isn't enough gas, so that's where the want is coming from. So we have a stable energy source. However, with increased push on energy efficiency, the programs Mass Save does, I'm sure some or all of you know about those in the buildings and in your homes, as well as what we personally do, what companies do, what the state, the federal government might do or not do these days, and with the much more solar, wind is going in all the time, and the big projects way off the coast of southern Massachusetts and Rhode Island for nearly a gigawatt of wind is coming online in the next few years. I think by 5 years it's all going to be up. So all these things going together with conservation should alleviate some of the issues. I'm not an expert in the amount of energy we need and these winter spikes we have, but we've got to do more about decarbonizing everything, vehicles and our heating and our electricity. And the thing that, of all the bad things mentioned, I didn't hear a couple that the doctor mentioned in this presentation at the North Parish Church, which was toluene and xylene, which EPA has no level that is safe for humans to take in or breathe those fumes. And the fracking business uses those chemicals in proprietary mixes that aren't known by EPA or anyone, whatever they put in the ground to release the gas. These other chemicals that you were mentioning are heavy metals, whenever, just come with some of the processing and the gas and water that comes up when they just get natural gas out. But the fracking, they actually put toluene, xylene, and other proprietary mix of chemicals down into the earth, as we've heard. And this Harvard professor laid this all out, and it's pretty clear that those are we're breathing those right inside our homes when you use a gas cooktop that you assume is only giving water and CO2 out into your home. Vent hoods, she said, would help, but they don't help hardly as much as getting that thing the hell out of your house. The methane is just a big problem for trees, the tree strips killing the trees, and then global warming. So obviously a very bad greenhouse gas. So natural gas is one of the cleaner fossil fuels, but we don't want more of it. And as a citizen, myself, my wife, many friends we have, we would lend our support to the Board of Health of our town signing on to that Mass Board of Health and doing everything we can as a town and personally, statewide and as a country to move ourselves away from fossil fuels.
All right, thank you, Mr. Whitman. Appreciate it. Any board members have any? Joe, you wanted to say something?
Natural gas, a little on the history. It's primarily methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, mostly methane. And about 1/3 of the methane from human activities is from extracting, processing, and burning coal, oil, and gas. Now, you talk about contaminants in natural gas, which you did say it's a clean fuel, but the contaminants in natural gas are in all fossil fuels. For example, coal, oil, sulfur, heavy metals, you mentioned. Heavy metals, coal, oil, particularly mercury is a major concern with certain types of coal. If you take a look at other ways of producing, say, electricity, there are problems with all sources of production. For example, solar. Recently, I flew to California, and the desert, much of the desert is covered with solar panels now. It wasn't like that several years ago when I flew to California. Turbines, they're a killing field. The tips of the blade up to 100 miles an hour. It kills the bats, kills the birds. You don't see them. Why? Because the carnivores know that that is where the spot is to eat. So they eat them. They take them away. Hydroelectric, spawning of fish, disrupted. Nuclear, what are you going to do with these spent rods? To me, the best way of producing electricity is burning waste. And they're moving to zero landfills in Europe right now. And when you burn waste, these sophisticated waste energy facilities, and I have been very much involved when I worked years ago in that field, you have sophisticated equipment to remove the acid gases, to remove the mercury, to remove the oxides of nitrogen. New England continues to lack adequate links to our nation's natural gas pipeline network. And plans to expand pipeline capacity in recent years, they've been scuttled by environmental groups, by Byzantine regulations, by activist courts. As such, part of liquefied natural gas comes from ships from all around the world. And certain times of the year, we pay up to 400 times as much for natural gas as states like New York and New Jersey. So when you put all this together, no matter what you burn, there is a problem with it. I'm so convinced that natural gas is the cleanest of all of these fossil fuels. If you want to continue to pay these exorbitant prices, up to 400 times what they pay for in other states, then continue to kill these pipelines. But if you want our prices to come down and realistically look at all types of fuels, then very much include natural gas. So that's my take as a chemical engineer. I consider myself to be an environmental engineer. And by the way, where is fracking? You mentioned fracking, concerned about fracking. What's the closest area that oil is fracked right now?
Oh, I think it's the natural gas that comes in. I'm not sure if it's. There's no fracking here. It's what,
well,
Pennsylvania.
I know the closest is Pennsylvania,
right.
And they have very tight regulations, and they have to recharge. And when you frack, by the way, what you do is you mentioned all these chemicals. Actually, it's sand and water. That's what you do. You inject under high pressure.
Oh, you-
Not all these other chemicals that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
you should hear the
So,
presentation
we
from
don't
that-
want to get
that
into a
lady.
discussion, I know I'm told to cut back, but
No, thank
that's
you
where
very
I'm
much.
coming from on this.
No, thank you very much, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming forward tonight. I do appreciate your opinions. I'm not going to entertain any votes this evening on whether or not we're going to send a letter. We're going to digest everything that was said. So I really do appreciate it. We don't have
Can I
an
just
audience
ask you
too
a
often.
question, Larry, about
Yeah,
the packet?
absolutely, yeah.
There seem to be 3 letters in here. I'm a little confused. There are 3 letters addressed to Governor Baker. Is there one you're asked, or what? Can you help me out? You said you're working with the Sierra Club.
Yes, no, I was confused.
One's a shortened version. One's
Yeah,
put out by
I was-
Mass Association.
Yes, I was confused by that, too. We were supposed to, not supposed to, but we had asked a Sierra Club member to come here tonight, but they couldn't make it. And I'm sure that they would be able to help with that. But I'll get back to you on that, why there's different versions and which one we're urging you.
Can I ask one more question there? In terms of getting traction in this matter, I mean, I understand the point. Where's the traction going to be gained? Like you talk, I mean, it's letters to Governor Baker, and it says here that there's concern they may propose a change. Are you looking to be proactive, or is there actually proposed pipelines in the process? So we kind of, where is this in the flow of things?
I think there was one that was mentioned.
There were some energy
Yeah, there is a concern the Baker administration will propose a change in law or regulation in order to enable new natural gas pipelines or otherwise encourage pipeline companies to bring new interstate gas pipelines to Massachusetts. That is why a strong showing of the boards of health on a letter urging support for clean, renewable energy rather than more fossil fuel infrastructure is so important.
Okay.
Any other board member? Any comments from the group? Okay.
I'm good for now.
All right. Thank you very much for coming. Much appreciated. Thank you. I'm sorry the minister couldn't make it. Okay, under new business, Board of Selectmen update. You know, I don't think I sent out to everybody did they? They're all set, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I sent out the final update, did I? I think I forgot. I'm sorry. I'll send it. I'll send it out. First, I want to thank.
One you presented a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, the one I presented a couple.
I don't remember seeing that.
No, I'm sorry about that. I meant to send it out the next day. I'll get it out to you.
Stellar reading.
I'll get to you. Frame it. But thank you very, very much for all of your participation in helping to put this together. What the various responsibilities are of the Health Department and Board of Health, what we accomplished in the fiscal year 2017, and what the priorities are in fiscal year, fiscal year 2018 to 19. I'm going to send it out. It was very nice. I took a lot of your comments. Joe, I took your quote as to the responsibilities of the Board of Health that was legislatively enacted. So I took part of that too, so that came out good. But I think it went well, and when I was done, a couple of the selectmen said this sounds like a public service announcement on how to improve your town. So everything that all of you sent in, I took some from everybody, I put it together and mushed it in, and you'll recognize your comments. And it really went very well. I think I was probably talking for about 20 minutes or something like that. It was, because they had a lot of questions too. Brian wasn't able to make it, but it did go well, and Tom was there. Tom received recognition and a certificate, so that was very, very nice. So.
Well, I think a good takeaway was that they were engaged, and at the end of it, they said, gee, we'd like to hear more about this. And I happened to be at an event a week or so later where 2 selectmen were there, and they came to me and said, they repeated the same thing. They said, we really should engage with boards and sort of learn more what they're doing. So it just always becomes a matter of how do you do that, and what's the best venue, and how do you get that onto them? Because I look at their agendas a lot, and they don't have 20 minutes in every single meeting to go through a list like that, but to give them updates in one manner or another, I think be good to them.
Yeah. No, it was a long time, you know, it was a little while, but I just thought, and Tom saw it ahead of time, but I just thought it was important that the town and the selectmen understand, and the departments, what the health department does, and I think they do a great job, all of you, and I mentioned all of your names too, and very proud. And what the Board of Health does to oversee the department, to make sure that you remain focused, you have certain duties that you have to perform.
You get a regular phone call.
Right.
You still get 18 a month?
Once in a while, once in a while.
I don't keep track anymore.
I don't have a smartphone, I can't text you. But,
Because it's always afternoon, right?
and I think hopefully it was an eye-opener for people that watch the Selectmen's Group. We talked about the speaker series, like we promoted Tom's talk tonight. And Tom mentioned that we're changing the way we're going about. He had mentioned that as far as regulatory, and now we're using different tools to try to promote the Board of Health and the Health Department. You mentioned that as far as our talks, so it went really well. And I think hopefully afterwards they have a better understanding as to how our Health Department works, what we do, which is an awful lot, and what our oversight is to the department and to the town. We basically look after the public health and well-being of everyone in town, guests, business, and residents. That's what our jobs are. And it's how we do it that really matters. So it went well. So congratulations to the Health Department. It's you that do it.
Thanks for going to
So
second.
thank you, all of you.
Big hand for the health department.
I really mean it. Next under new business is the body art regulations addendum. Joe's been working on it with Brian. I've been calling Brian and talking to him about it. So Brian came up with a great idea to do an addendum, I thought, to our current regulations because they're old, and the addendum will bring us a little more up to date, and also, why don't you go over it?
Basically, instead of revising the regulations from cover to cover, which, as Joe knows, we've been working on it for a while, is very time-consuming, very daunting. There's a lot that goes into it. What this is this is a stopgap between now and when we can get that entire regulation completely revised. This covers the things that we're lacking. There's new practices and new procedures out there that people are doing and people are looking to get done in the cosmetology business. So permanent makeup, semi-permanent makeup, microblading, things like that are becoming more mainstream, and they're not covered under our regulations. So basically what I did, I took the things that other communities have done. I have a friend that works for Boston Public Health Commission who just did this exact same thing. So I worked with him on best practices, language, things like that. And everything from adding a couple definitions in, which is what is permanent cosmetics, semi-permanent cosmetics, microblading, things like that, to adding those criteria into our licensor. So right now it just says body art. This actually includes these procedures as body art, just to tighten up a little bit. And then I added in a apprenticeship. As of right now, our regulations don't have any training requirements except for a couple of classes, which out on the street, it's known that North Andover's regulations are very lax, and if you want to be a permanent makeup artist, come here. So this is going to try to help alleviate and get that word changed around a little bit. So instead of taking CPR, first aid, and a bloodborne pathogen class and being able to get licensed, this puts in an apprenticeship requirement and training requirements, such as schooling, professional membership in the American Academy of Permanent Makeup or Society of Permanent Cosmetics, something like that, as well as an apprenticeship or a licensure from another town that has similar qualifications and requirements. So you can't just go in and get a body art practitioner's license without actually knowing what you're doing. So this kind of tightens all that up a little bit.
Essentially, what you're doing is creating a situation where somebody can't go from never doing this before
Yep.
to just being able to do it.
Taking an online
So we're
course.
just basically protecting We're not saying that you can't do this, we're just saying that if you're gonna do this,
Exactly.
you have to have some experience doing it and some basic,
Yes.
basic training on infection control and all these other
Yep.
things.
Anatomy, physiology, infection control, bloodborne pathogens, and then working with either having schooling for it or training through an established practice.
I'm entirely behind this. Now, this was distributed on an email chain, which will be the public record, right?
Yep.
So I would like to simply move that we adopt the addendum that has, the most recent iteration of the addendum that was put forward as our policy.
Okay.
Second? Discussion?
Discuss.
Joe, second.
Couple questions. You say that they have to do an apprenticeship with somebody in North Andover who currently practices with a license.
Or some other place.
Well, this doesn't say that.
I believe,
Under training requirements, 1C, a one-year
sorry.
apprenticeship with somebody with a valid North Andover license.
So if they're coming here, 1A says a body art practitioner applicant has not previously held the body art practitioner's license in North Andover or another city or town within the Commonwealth. So if they've apprenticed somewhere else, that's fine too. But if they haven't apprenticed here and they're gonna get a job here, then they have to work in a licensed establishment here. Follow me?
If they have not previously held a license here or another town,
Correct.
then they must apply for an apprenticeship license. So if they've been to school
Yep.
and they've never practiced in a, whatever this is called, an office,
Correct.
then I go down, it looks like I go down to C, and it says they have to do an establishment, have to do an apprenticeship in North Andover.
Yes.
How many North Andover body art licenses exist currently?
5? 4.
I thought it was
4.
What does this person do if one of those 4 is not available? Or
What do you
won't do
mean
it?
by-
I mean, you're sort of encumbering 4 people in North Andover to,
We have 4 licensed body art establishments here in town. So if somebody's gonna get a job at one of those places,
okay.
then they need to work under one of the
So it's
licensed
4,
practitioners.
not 4 practitioners, but 4
4 establishments.
places?
Yes.
Okay.
So what happens, if somebody's gonna come in and they wanna open up a new establishment, they have to have a license from somewhere else first. They can't just come in and get their first license ever and open up a new store.
Right.
So we're trying to avoid that, where if they have established business and an established license somewhere else, then that's
Okay.
fine. And we're okay with that because they have experience in training. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I think this is good work because it covers a void that we have.
Yes.
Going forward, we will update the regulation.
Yes, this is
And
just
as
a
you said,
temporary.
And I used the word you a number of weeks ago, and you used it tonight. It is a daunting undertaking. When I started to work with Brian on it, it's like 18 pages, and I had all this research to do, and I did it, the first draft, but it needs a lot of work. So this is
Right.
great stuff.
This
the
is
addendum. This is
for
really
the
good.
next few months while we can finish a new regulation itself to incorporate this stuff and the stopgap in there. Just for the time being,
Yeah.
just to hold this over, I think.
So we have a motion, what's been second?
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye, it's unanimous. Okay,
Adopted.
adopted.
Thank you.
Very good. I see 2 people in the audience. Are you here on business or? School assignment.
She was here last time, too.
On how to conduct or not to conduct a meeting.
Well, welcome. Do you have any questions? Okay. All right, tell your teacher we asked. Okay, Brian, we're just going to quickly, any highlight on the department reports, and we talked about that.
Yeah, I think one highlight, we did our Surf Safe class. We had almost 20 participants in the class. Very successful. It was very appreciated in town. We had it at the senior center, and we're gonna try to do that on an annual basis. I think the establishments that we reached out to that participated were extremely happy. It was so close, it was right in town, it was cheaper than other places, and they were very, very ecstatic about being able to take it locally like this.
Excellent.
Yep.
Fine, for whomever is listening, just talk a little bit about Serve Safe, what it is.
ServSafe, that is a food sanitation certificate that you get through a nationally accredited company called ServSafe. And what it is, it's a food manager and safety training that teaches you about temperatures, time and temperature control, food safety, food handling, worker illnesses and what to do, equipment specs, what kind of equipment you should be using, sanitizers, things like that. So it's a good overview for anybody in the food industry.
Okay, good. One last thing is, once a year, I had committed to do a vote for chairman, so I'm going to bring that up. As far as, we need to vote a chairman once a year. We committed to do that. So is there anyone interested in running for, for chairman?
Like F Trooper, everyone takes a step back.
Everyone take a step back.
You've never been so quiet.
Well, if nobody's running, I would imagine then by default that everything will remain the same. Is that correct?
Yes, we have to elect.
We have to have a vote.
You have to have a vote. Well, I'm saying nobody's running. I mean, okay, so, vote chairman. Who's not?
Fixler for chairman.
Second. Okay. Any discussion? Yes.
No discussion, you've
No
done a good
discussion.
job, Larry.
With that in mind, really, a chairmanship really should have a term, and when we changed it over last time, we set it basically in July.
Yeah,
So I'd suggest either, when you became chairman last year, so we said, we voted it like in April, but we said basically at the turnover after town meeting. So I'd suggest to follow that. We basically appointed you voted you, elected you for a one-year term.
I'm a
So
year now.
And that was
Yeah.
through this meeting.
Yeah, I was through this meeting, it's
Okay,
1
so-
year, so.
all right.
We should figure
The
it
term
out.
starting at this meeting for 1 year forward.
Correct. June. Because our terms end in June, too.
Yeah.
So it would make sense every June we'll just vote for chairman. Okay, so we'll take the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations on condolences.
Yeah, I know.
Can
No,
I add something from the Department of Reports?
Yeah, please.
We're having
You were
a
next,
blood
by the way.
drive at the senior center this Saturday, June 30th, from 9 to 2. So if anyone's available, anyone out in the audience or here, there's a critical need before the 4th of July weekend, so I'm just kind of letting everyone know about it.
I'm sorry, what is it?
This Saturday, so in 2 days from now, at the senior center from 9 to 2.
Thank you.
The sign near where they're building
Yes,
the
we got a
elementary
new
school, because
electronic
everybody's interested in the kindergarten, so
I
it's
know.
a good placement for
A lot of traffic there.
Yeah.
Is this on Facebook and, you know, the?
It will be.
the-
I've seen it
what
a
we're
few
supposed to do?
places.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, you know, the last thing I want to say, and everyone jump in, don't just let me say it, is our previous chairman, Dr. Thomas Trowbridge, and our current board member, Dr. Thomas Trowbridge, this is his last meeting. Tom is, what's that?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Tom's off to a new adventure, and we've been with Tom, I think I've been with him for 14 years. I don't even remember. I had dark hair, I think, when I first met you.
Frank got here.
Frank had hair. There you go. I remember that. But I've been with Tom when it was a three-person board, and he taught me a lot. He helped indoctrinate me. I was scared as could be as a new board member. I didn't know what to do. I had no clue what to do. But Tom really helped me out and gave me the guidance that I needed to come up and become a chairman and to plan and focus what we do. So I want to thank you. There's no replacing a Tom Trowbridge. All I can do is thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a friend and working with me all these years and serving your town as eloquently and distinguishedly as you have done and are doing now. So I just want to thank you for being here and what you've done.
Thank you. I mean, I think, as I thought back on it, I'd just basically say the same thing I said to the selectmen. I think when I reflected back on it's been 15 years, I really think I've learned more and sort of appreciated more being around all of you and the things that we get to do as the Board of Health. It's probably brought back more to me than I could ever have given back to the board. It's been a cumulative benefit to me and what I know about the way this city and town works and the way government works, and really gives me a better appreciation of being a community person and really giving back to a community. But all good things come to an end. But I think that another thing I've seen in many places I've been, other groups and so on, is that we do really stand on the shoulders of giants, and I had the benefit to do that in a couple instances. I learned a lot from Dr. McMillan Sr. and Gate and Osgood. Those are people that we stand on top of as they built a base for us, and I hope that, certainly expect the board to do that in my absence. You will carry on without me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Tom, would you like to call the meeting to adjourn, please? Wait a minute.
A motion to adjourn the meeting.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Or we're adjourned.